She made her weak daughter wed a human. Years later, the queen would regret everything. While other young nobles showed ambition, skill, or even cunning, Lyra seemed to drift through life like a soft breeze. She had a gentle heart and a quiet mind, often preferring to sit by the palace gardens, watching alien birds flit between crystal trees, rather than engage in the strategic games that the court prized. Queen Thalira, her mother, noticed this with growing unease. The empire had survived centuries of careful leadership, and Thalira wanted nothing less than a strong, decisive heir to continue her legacy. In the grand hall of the palace, tall crystal pillars shimmered in the soft light of Althuria's twin suns. The queen paced slowly, her robes flowing like liquid silver. Advisors hovered nearby, their holographic tablets casting faint glows across the polished floor. Today, she had gathered them not for a council meeting, but to announce a decision that would shock many in the empire. "My daughter," the queen began, her voice steady and commanding, "must marry, and she must marry someone who will strengthen the empire, someone capable of guiding it through challenges yet unseen." Whispers filled the room. Several nobles exchanged uneasy glances. In Althuria, marriage was not only a personal choice but a strategic move, a way to secure alliances, resources, and prestige. Yet the queen's next words were unexpected. "We will invite a human from the Sol system," she said, her gaze fixed firmly on the tallest advisor. "He will become Lyra's husband." The murmurs grew louder. Humans. The alien nobles had heard of humans through distant trade and interstellar reports. They were considered fragile, soft, and untested. A human prince, or even a commoner, that was unheard of. Many looked to Queen Thalira with confusion and mild indignation. One advisor, an older, wise-looking alien named Valen, finally spoke. "Your Majesty, humans have been observed for centuries. They lack the longevity, the mental discipline, and the strategic training that our heirs undergo. Are you certain this choice aligns with the Empire's needs?" The Queen did not flinch. "I have seen enough to know. This human, Ethan, is unlike others. He has potential, intelligence, and a perspective we have yet to understand. My daughter will learn from him, and together they will guide the Empire into a future richer than we can imagine." Lyra, seated quietly near the balcony, felt a mix of shock and confusion. She had expected the usual suitors, strong Arthurian nobles or perhaps a neighboring prince. But a human. She barely knew the species, except for the stories of their courage in small explorations, their simple yet strange inventions, and their unorthodox ways of living. After the council ended, Lyra wandered into the palace gardens. She walked among the crystalline flowers, their colors shifting with the sunlight, and tried to make sense of her mother's plan. She remembered her mother's words, "Learn from him, grow stronger. Do not waste your life in hesitation." Yet Lyra did not feel weak. She felt unsure. She had always relied on her own instincts, her empathy, and her ability to observe and listen. But the world of strategy and power in the court seemed far from these gentle skills. And now she was being asked to marry someone she did not know, someone from a completely different species, with the expectation that she would grow stronger under his guidance. Meanwhile, far across the stars, Ethan had just completed another day of work in his small but bustling colony on Earth. Humans had been learning about other species for decades, and exchanges of culture, knowledge, and technology were slowly beginning. Ethan had always been curious, brave in his own quiet way, and unusually perceptive. When the message arrived from the Arthurian Empire, inviting him to participate in a diplomatic and matrimonial exchange, he could hardly believe it. "A human," Ethan repeated aloud, staring at the holographic letter that shimmered before him. "A princess from another galaxy," he smiled, a mixture of nervousness and excitement. Humans were often underestimated by other species, but he had a knack for seeing possibilities where others saw obstacles. Perhaps this was one of those moments. Perhaps this was his chance to show that humans were capable of more than anyone expected. The journey to Althuria was unlike anything Ethan had experienced. His small spaceship glided through layers of starlight, past swirling nebulae and planets of unimaginable beauty. When he finally approached the Althurian capital, the city stretched below him like a jewel. Towers of crystal, bridges of light, and streets that sparkled with energy. It was breathtaking, and Ethan could not help but feel a deep respect for the civilization that had invited him. He was greeted by Lyra herself, a vision of quiet elegance. She wore a flowing gown that shimmered like the twin suns above, and her eyes held a gentle intelligence that immediately caught his attention. She bowed politely. "Welcome to Althuria, Ethan. I hope your journey was comfortable." Ethan bowed in return. "Thank you, Princess Lyra. It is an honor to be here. Your world, it's beautiful beyond words." Their first meeting was filled with cautious politeness. Lyra had been trained in diplomacy, in etiquette, and in the subtle power of conversation, but she found herself drawn to Ethan's sincerity. Unlike other beings she had met, he did not seem interested in impressing her with power or knowledge. He simply listened, observed, and spoke with thoughtful honesty. In the days that followed, Lyra and Ethan began to understand each other slowly. The court watched with fascination, and some with quiet skepticism. Could this human truly be a partner for a princess of the Althurian Empire? Could he bring the strength that Queen Thalira sought? Lyra noticed small things that made her heart lift. Ethan would quietly organize the palace archives in more efficient ways, notice the needs of the staff, and even create small devices to make life easier in the palace. He was not a warrior or a noble in the traditional sense, yet he had a skill that seemed rare. He could see problems clearly, and he could solve them with patience and creativity. Queen Thalira observed this with a mixture of curiosity and doubt. She had chosen him for a reason, believing he could help her daughter grow stronger. Yet she could not ignore her instincts. Humans were unpredictable, and the future of the empire was too important to leave to chance. Still, she allowed Lyra and Ethan to spend time together, knowing that growth could come in unexpected forms. One evening, Lyra and Ethan walked along the edge of the palace gardens. The twin suns were setting, casting long shadows and painting the sky in orange and purple. Ethan turned to Lyra. "I know this is all very sudden. I know we come from different worlds. But I hope we can learn from each other and perhaps help each other grow." Lyra smiled softly. "I hope so too. I have never met anyone like you, Ethan. I think I might actually learn a lot from you." Ethan laughed quietly. "And I will learn from you, Princess. You have a perspective I could never imagine on my own." That night, Lyra lay in her room thinking. She realized that perhaps strength was not always about power, control, or dominance. Perhaps it was about patience, understanding, and the ability to see potential where others saw weakness. Perhaps her mother's decision, strange as it seemed, might not be a punishment but an opportunity. And so, as the stars twinkled above the Althurian capital, two beings from completely different worlds began a journey together. A journey that would challenge their perceptions, test their abilities, and ultimately change the future of the empire in ways no one could have predicted. Queen Thalira, watching from her chambers, felt a pang of hope mixed with uncertainty. She had made her choice, believing it was for the best. But as humans and aliens took tentative steps toward understanding and collaboration, she could not yet foresee how transformative this union would become. Little did she know, the seemingly weak Princess Lyra and the underestimated human, Ethan, were about to prove that strength often comes from the most unexpected places. And in time, the Empire would witness a partnership unlike any it had ever known, one that could change the course of history itself. The palace of Althuria was vast and filled with wonders that no human had ever imagined. Towers of crystal gleamed in the sunlight, and walkways of translucent material arched over gardens that seemed to glow with their own inner light. Lyra led Ethan through these gardens every day, showing him the secrets of her world: trees that shimmered with changing colors, fountains that flowed with liquid that glowed softly in the dark, and birds that sang in melodies far beyond human comprehension. At first, Ethan struggled to understand the alien flora and fauna. He would accidentally touch a glowing plant, only for it to react by emitting a small, harmless spark of light. Lyra would giggle and gently pull his hand away. "Careful, Ethan. Not all things here are dangerous, but they do respond to attention," she said. Ethan smiled. "I'm used to Earth, where most plants just sit quietly. Here, everything seems alive in a different way." Lyra nodded, watching him with curiosity. Humans were fascinating, she realized. They were simple in ways that could sometimes seem weak, yet there was a subtle depth to them that the Arthurians rarely possessed. Ethan's mind was quick to notice patterns, to find solutions, and to empathize with living creatures. Even without special training, he instinctively understood the palace and its environment in ways that few Arthurians could. It was during a lesson on Arthurian etiquette that the first real surprise came. Lyra was explaining the intricate ways the royal family interacted with advisors and visitors: the subtle hand gestures, the shifting tones of voice, the pauses that carried meaning. Ethan listened carefully, nodded, and then asked a question that made Lyra pause. "Why do you follow all these steps if they are only about appearances? Wouldn't it be better to speak clearly and honestly?" he asked. Lyra blinked. No one had ever questioned that before. In Arthurian society, appearances were everything. A misstep could mean loss of respect or influence. She expected him to be confused, flustered, or afraid of the consequences. But Ethan's question was simple, sincere, and it made her think. You might be right," she admitted slowly. "But here people value tradition above all. Deviating from it can be seen as weakness." Ethan shrugged. "Sometimes traditions can blind people to better ways of doing things. I mean, isn't the point of etiquette to communicate well? Then why not focus on the meaning rather than the form?" Lyra stared at him. She had never thought of it this way. The human's perspective, practical, honest, unafraid to question rules, was refreshing. Perhaps her mother had been right. There was more to Ethan than anyone in the court realized. Over the following weeks, Lyra and Ethan began to spend more time together, learning from one another. Ethan adapted quickly to the alien world, inventing small devices to help with daily life. He created a self-cleaning tray for the kitchen staff, a device to adjust lighting in the crystal halls for comfort, and even a simple way to organize the palace archives that reduced mistakes and saved hours of work. The palace staff quietly marveled at Ethan's efficiency. They had been trained for decades in traditional methods, yet this human who had never grown up in Arthuria improved their work with nothing but observation, logic, and care. Lyra watched him with increasing admiration. "You make it all seem so simple," she said one afternoon. "But I know it is. You think about things no one else notices." Ethan smiled, brushing a stray lock of hair from his forehead. "Humans are used to noticing small things. It's how we survive on a planet full of challenges. I guess it helps in your palace, too." Their bond grew stronger with every shared conversation, every collaborative project. Lyra found herself enjoying the simplicity of Ethan's human ways, his curiosity, his humor, his ability to stay calm under pressure. She realized that strength was not only in the sword or in authority, but also in patience, creativity, and understanding. Meanwhile, Queen Thalira observed from afar. She had expected her daughter to feel weak and dependent at first, but instead, she saw Lyra growing in confidence. Ethan was proving more than capable, not in the ways she had imagined, but in ways that were subtle, meaningful, and undeniable. One morning, the queen summoned Lyra to her chambers. Sunlight streamed through the crystal windows, casting patterns of color across the floor. Lyra entered, bowing respectfully. "Mother," she said, "you wish to see me." Queen Thalira studied her daughter carefully. "I wish to know how your time with the human progresses. Have you learned anything of value? Has he changed you?" Lyra hesitated. I think I am learning more than I expected, not just from him but with him. He notices things I didn't think mattered. He asks questions that make me think differently. I feel capable in ways I didn't before." The queen's face remained neutral, but inside she felt a twinge of surprise. She had believed that a human could not bring strength to her daughter, but perhaps strength did not always come in the way she imagined. "Be cautious," she said finally. "Do not allow sentiment to cloud judgment. Humans are unpredictable. Remember your duty to the Empire." Lyra nodded. "I will, Mother, but I also see that there is value in his perspective. Perhaps it is not weakness but a different kind of strength." Life in the palace continued. Lyra and Ethan shared meals with the royal family, attended ceremonies, and even explored remote sections of the palace that few visitors ever saw. They discovered hidden gardens, secret chambers with ancient artifacts, and libraries filled with knowledge that had been preserved for centuries. Ethan's curiosity often led them into unexpected discoveries, from ancient mechanical devices to texts describing philosophies of past Arthurian rulers. During one evening walk, Ethan found a small, dusty orb in a forgotten alcove. "I wonder what this is," he said, holding it gently. Lyra peered over his shoulder. "It is an artifact from a time long before my mother's rule. Its purpose is unclear. Most would ignore it as useless." Ethan examined it carefully, his human instincts analyzing patterns and possibilities. Sometimes, things ignored by others contain the most value. Maybe it's not about what it is, but what we can learn from it. Lyra smiled. "You have a way of seeing meaning where others see nothing. I am beginning to understand why my mother chose you, even if it seemed strange at first." Ethan looked at her, his eyes bright. "And I am learning from you too. Patience, wisdom, leadership. You teach me more than any textbook ever could." As the days passed, the alien court could no longer ignore Ethan's abilities. Small successes, efficient solutions, thoughtful innovations, and clever insights began to accumulate. Some advisors whispered that perhaps the human was not as weak as they had assumed. Others still doubted, but curiosity and admiration were growing alongside skepticism. For Lyra, the experience was transformative. She had once believed that she was weak, that she lacked the qualities to lead or to inspire. Yet with Ethan, she discovered her own hidden strengths. Her empathy, intelligence, and careful judgment combined with his creativity and practical wisdom to form a partnership that was quietly extraordinary. One afternoon, as they sat on a balcony overlooking the glowing gardens, Lyra turned to Ethan. "Do you ever think about the future?" she asked. "Constantly," he replied. "Humans always do. We wonder what we can achieve, how we can improve, and what our lives might mean." "Why do you ask?" Lyra smiled softly. "Because I think about the Empire, about duty, about what we can accomplish if we work together. I am beginning to realize that perhaps strength is not only about what you can do alone, but what you can do with someone who sees the world differently." Ethan nodded, a gentle warmth in his eyes. "I feel the same. Together, we can find solutions neither of us could discover alone." In that moment, the sun dipped behind the horizon, casting a serene glow over the palace. Two very different beings, from different worlds, with different histories and expectations, sat together, learning from each other, building trust, and discovering that the combination of human ingenuity and Arthurian tradition could create something greater than either had imagined. Little did they know, the true test of their abilities would soon arrive. Challenges, though subtle and unexpected, would push them to think creatively, act wisely, and prove to the entire empire that strength comes in many forms. And when the first of these challenges appeared, it would become clear that the underestimated human and the once weak princess were beginning a journey that would change not only themselves, but the course of history itself. The Arthurian Empire had always been known for its elegance, its wisdom, and its careful management of resources. Yet, even in a kingdom that seemed perfect, problems could arise that challenged the most experienced leaders. In the months following Ethan's arrival, subtle difficulties began to appear, small issues that, if left unresolved, could grow into significant troubles. The first of these trials involved the palace irrigation system. Arthuria's gardens and farmlands depended on a network of translucent channels that carried water infused with essential nutrients. For centuries, the system had worked perfectly, maintained by teams trained in ancient techniques. Yet one morning, sensors indicated irregular flow rates. Some plants were receiving too little water, while others were overwhelmed. Lyra inspected the situation alongside Ethan. "I do not understand," she said. "The engineers have followed the same procedure for decades. How can this happen?" Ethan knelt near the main channel, examining the patterns of flow. His human mind approached the problem differently from the Arthurians, who often relied on strict protocols. He noticed subtle shifts, slight blockages, and energy fluctuations in the channels. "Sometimes," he said, "systems fail not because of mistakes but because they are rigid. If the system cannot adapt to minor changes, it can collapse in unexpected ways." Lyra listened carefully. She realized he was right. The engineers had been trained to follow instructions exactly, never to improvise or adjust. Ethan proposed a simple solution: modify the flow regulators to respond automatically to changes in water pressure and nutrient levels. The engineers were hesitant, but Lyra persuaded them to trust Ethan's guidance. The results were immediate. The gardens flourished, water distribution became consistent, and crops that had begun to wilt revived. Word of Ethan's solution spread quietly among the staff, surprising many who had doubted the human's abilities. Lyra watched with quiet pride. Her partner had just solved a problem that even seasoned experts had struggled with for years. Encouraged by this success, Lyra and Ethan began to tackle other minor challenges. The palace archives, which contained thousands of fragile scrolls and holographic records, were in disarray. Misplaced documents caused delays and confusion. Ethan suggested a system that combined categorization, color coding, and digital indexing. Within days, the archives became organized, efficient, and easier for the staff to navigate. Through these small victories, the princess began to see the depth of Ethan's mind. He did not have the raw power or longevity of an Arthurian, but he had ingenuity, empathy, and patience, qualities that were just as important for leadership. Meanwhile, Queen Thalira observed these successes with a mixture of pride and doubt. She had arranged this marriage thinking it would strengthen Lyra, but she had not anticipated how quickly the human would influence not only her daughter but also the palace itself. Though she valued progress, she worried about the unpredictable nature of humans. Could their influence grow too powerful? Could they change the empire in ways that would be difficult to control? One evening, as the twin suns set, Lyra and Ethan walked along the crystal terraces overlooking the city. The streets below shimmered with light, reflecting the harmonious coexistence of technology and tradition. "Mother seems uneasy," Ethan said softly. "Do you think she doubts me?" Lyra shook her head. "She is cautious, as all rulers must be. But I think she is also beginning to understand that your perspective can bring value. It is just unfamiliar to her." Ethan smiled. "Then I will keep doing my best, not for recognition but to help." The following weeks brought new challenges. A sudden change in the energy supply threatened the palace's lighting and essential systems. Arthurian engineers were prepared to follow the old protocols, but Ethan suggested a combination of energy redistribution and simple adjustments to the conduits. The result was smoother operation with minimal disruption to palace life. Lyra noticed a pattern forming. Your human ways, they are practical, adaptive, and flexible. That is something our empire has rarely seen. We rely so much on tradition that small problems can grow into crises. You prevent that with creativity. Ethan laughed softly. I call it human stubbornness. We refuse to accept that something cannot be fixed. We try until we find a solution. It was during these days that a delegation from a neighboring system arrived, seeking to discuss trade and resource sharing. Queen Thalira welcomed them formally, but subtle tensions emerged. The delegation questioned some of the empire's practices, pointing out inefficiencies in transport routes and supply chains. Many advisors became defensive, insisting that centuries of tradition were enough. Lyra and Ethan were called to the council chamber to offer advice. While Lyra remained calm and diplomatic, Ethan spoke with clarity and logic. He suggested minor adjustments to transportation schedules, resource allocation, and communication channels. The delegation was impressed. They had expected resistance or arrogance but found understanding, practicality, and intelligence instead. By the end of the meeting, the neighboring system agreed to a cooperative plan, one that would benefit both civilizations. The council members exchanged quiet glances. Even some of the Queen's most skeptical advisors had begun to recognize that the human was capable of thinking strategically in ways that complemented Arthurian tradition. Lyra felt a swell of pride. She had doubted her own strength, thinking she needed to change completely to be useful. But Ethan's presence taught her a vital lesson. Leadership was not about doing everything alone or following rigid rules. It was about partnership, perspective, and using all available strengths wisely. One quiet afternoon, Lyra and Ethan explored a section of the palace rarely visited by anyone. It was a series of small workshops where past inventors had left tools, gadgets, and half-finished projects. Ethan's eyes lit up. "This is amazing," he said, running his hands over the devices. "So many ideas left unfinished. Imagine what could be accomplished if we tried some of these." Lyra laughed. "You see potential where others see dust and clutter." Together, they began experimenting. Ethan adapted old Arthurian machines using simple mechanical principles and his own intuition. Lyra suggested modifications based on her knowledge of energy flow and crystal structures. By the end of the day, they had created small devices to improve lighting, irrigation, and even communication within the palace. Word of their successes reached the villagers surrounding the palace. For generations, humans had been seen as a curiosity at best, irrelevant at worst. But the stories of Ethan's ingenuity, combined with Lyra's growing confidence, began to change perceptions. People whispered that perhaps humans were not as weak as previously believed. Perhaps they brought new ways of thinking, capable of benefiting everyone. The Queen herself could no longer deny the impact. She observed from her chambers as Lyra and Ethan guided palace staff, interacted with engineers, and inspired confidence in both humans and Arthurians. The two were a team, complementary and wise in ways that no single individual could match. One evening, as Lyra prepared for a formal dinner with visiting dignitaries, Ethan helped her arrange ceremonial items. He did so with care, showing attention to detail and respect for Arthurian customs. "You are learning quickly," Lyra said, smiling. "Even with human habits, you are mindful of our ways." Ethan shrugged modestly. "I want to respect your world, but I also hope to bring a fresh perspective. Sometimes the old ways can benefit from new ideas." The dinner was a success. Guests praised Lyra's poise and Ethan's ingenuity, noting how well they complemented each other. The Queen, though composed, felt the first pangs of worry mixed with pride. She had arranged this union hoping to strengthen her daughter, but she had not anticipated that both would grow together, changing the palace, the advisors, and perhaps even the empire itself. As the twin moons rose over Althuria, casting silver light across the gardens, Lyra and Ethan walked in silence. Both were tired but content. They had faced trials, solved problems, and proven their worth, not through force, but through intelligence, creativity, and cooperation. "I think we are learning from each other," Lyra said softly. "I no longer feel weak. I feel capable." Ethan took her hand gently. "And I feel like I belong here, even on a world so different from mine. Together, we can face anything." They did not yet know what challenges the future would bring, but one truth had become clear. Underestimated humans could inspire, solve, and lead in ways that no one had expected. And a seemingly weak princess could blossom into a confident, wise leader when given the right guidance and partnership. The Arthurian Empire was entering a new era, one of subtle change, quiet innovation, and the proof that strength is not always measured by power alone, but by creativity, empathy, and the courage to embrace new ideas. And as the palace lights shimmered beneath the twin moons, Queen Thalira realized that her carefully planned arrangement, the marriage of her daughter to a human, was beginning to show results far beyond what she had imagined. Yet she could not foresee the true impact this partnership would have on the empire, the neighboring systems, and the very history of their civilization. Little did anyone know, the trials that had been solved so quietly were only the beginning. Bigger tests lay ahead, and when they arrived, Lyra and Ethan would need every ounce of ingenuity, patience, and understanding they had cultivated together. The Arthurian Empire had never seen a partnership quite like the one between Princess Lyra and Ethan. Their work, initially unnoticed by the larger court, had begun to ripple outward, subtly transforming not only palace life, but also the perception of humans within the empire. It began with small acknowledgments from advisors. When Ethan suggested ways to improve resource distribution among the outer provinces, the administrators were skeptical at first. They had spent decades following rigid schedules and protocols, yet when Ethan's plans were implemented, results were immediate. Crops thrived, transportation of goods became smoother, and complaints from villagers decreased. The success was undeniable. Lyra observed the changes quietly, pride swelling in her chest. She realized something she had not before. Leadership was not about commanding authority alone, but about making life better for the people. And humans, despite being underestimated, possessed a unique ability to see problems from angles others ignored. News of Ethan's contribution spread beyond the palace. Traders, messengers, and diplomats began to speak of the human who thought differently, who solved problems creatively without force or domination. Even distant regions of the empire began to implement his ideas. Lyra worked alongside him, guiding the adaptation of his solutions to fit Arthurian culture, and their partnership became a model of cooperation that no one had anticipated. Queen Thalira watched these developments with mixed feelings. Pride for her daughter's growth was tempered by unease. She had expected Lyra to gain confidence, yes, but not in a way that would elevate a human to such visible importance. In the traditional view of the court, humans were fragile, inexperienced, and incapable of leadership. Yet here was Ethan, quietly earning respect across multiple sectors, and her daughter was flourishing alongside him. One morning, the queen called Lyra to her chambers. Sunlight poured through the crystal windows, painting the floor with golden patterns. Lyra entered gracefully, bowing as always. "Lyra," the queen began, her voice calm but firm, "reports have reached me from the outer provinces. Villagers praise your efforts. They speak highly of Ethan's guidance. Tell me, what is happening?" Lyra smiled softly. "Mother, what is happening is that people are learning to trust solutions, not just traditions. Ethan's perspective, human as it is, helps me see what we might have overlooked. Together, we are improving lives." The queen's lips pressed together. She had hoped for visible results, but not this degree of influence. She studied her daughter carefully. Lyra was no longer timid or hesitant. Her voice was steady, her posture confident, and her eyes shone with understanding. The princess whom she had once deemed weak was now a capable, inspiring leader, and her human partner had played a vital role in this transformation. Meanwhile, Lyra and Ethan faced a new challenge that tested their cooperation. The Empire's central energy grid had begun showing unusual fluctuations. Arthurian engineers were perplexed. The system was ancient but carefully maintained. A sudden instability could threaten the functioning of entire cities. Lyra and Ethan were called to investigate. Standing in the massive control chamber, they examined the glowing conduits and energy nodes. Ethan noticed subtle patterns, minor overloads in some circuits and underused energy in others. "Your engineers focus on one section at a time," Ethan explained. "They maintain each part perfectly, but they do not account for the interaction between sections. If we adjust them collectively, the system can balance itself." Lyra nodded. "We will need to collaborate closely with the engineers. If we can't get their trust, the plan may fail." Together, they guided the engineers, showing them how slight adjustments in energy distribution could stabilize the grid. Their method worked flawlessly. Energy flowed evenly across the Empire's cities, lights remained bright, and machinery functioned without interruption. Even skeptical advisors admitted that the humans' insight had prevented a potential crisis. Word of this achievement reached the Imperial Council. Meetings were held to formally recognize Lyra and Ethan's contributions. The princess's calm leadership, combined with Ethan's ingenuity, earned applause from officials who had once doubted them. Even the queen, seated silently among the council, could not hide a flicker of awe. It was during one such council session that a visiting diplomat remarked, "Princess Lyra, your partnership with Ethan has transformed our operations. We have seen innovation, efficiency, and clarity we have never known before. It is remarkable." Lyra smiled humbly. "Thank you. It is not only my work. Ethan's ideas, combined with the wisdom of our people, have made this possible. Together, we can achieve more than any of us could alone." The diplomat nodded, visibly impressed. "A rare quality indeed. You have my admiration and my respect." Outside the council chamber, whispers circulated. Many citizens, once wary of humans, began speaking of them with curiosity and admiration. Stories emerged about Ethan's simple inventions, his clever solutions, and his collaborative nature. Children asked questions about human ingenuity, scholars studied his methods, and even older nobles who resisted change began to acknowledge his talents. Lyra noticed another transformation, her own confidence. She no longer doubted her abilities or feared public opinion. Where she had once hesitated, she now spoke decisively. She was learning to combine her Arthurian wisdom with Ethan's human creativity, a partnership that made them both stronger. One evening, the palace gardens were filled with guests for a ceremonial dinner. Lyra and Ethan walked among them, explaining some of the recent innovations and answering questions. The guests were amazed at how seamlessly human ideas could integrate with Arthurian tradition. Queen Thalira observed quietly from a balcony. She had always valued discipline, tradition, and measured judgment. Yet here she was, seeing her daughter lead with confidence, inspire others, and elevate a human to a level of respect she had never imagined. The queen felt a mixture of pride and unease. She had hoped to strengthen her daughter, but she had not anticipated that the human would shine so brightly alongside her. Lyra turned to Ethan as the guests mingled. "It is incredible," she whispered. "We are making a difference, more than I imagined possible." Ethan smiled. "It's because we work together. You have wisdom I could never learn on my own, and I hope my perspective helps you see possibilities you might not have considered." Lyra's eyes softened. "You have already helped me see so much. I feel stronger, not just because of you, but because we complement each other." The queen, still watching from above, realized the truth. Her daughter had grown into a capable leader, and the human had proven that underestimated beings could achieve greatness. She felt the first stirrings of regret, not for choosing Ethan, but for ever doubting the potential that humans possessed. In the weeks that followed, Lyra and Ethan's influence continued to grow. Scholars visited to learn from Ethan's methods, engineers adapted his designs, and neighboring systems expressed interest in collaborating with the Arthurian Empire. The palace, once a place where tradition ruled without question, had begun to hum with innovation, curiosity, and cooperation. Lyra and Ethan also found moments of quiet reflection. Walking along the terraces under the twin moons, they talked about the future. "Do you ever think about what lies ahead?" Lyra asked. Ethan nodded. "Every day, there is so much potential for us, for the Empire, for humans and Arthurians alike. I want to make a difference wherever I can." Lyra smiled. "And I want to lead with strength, wisdom, and understanding. Together, we can inspire people to see beyond what they think they know." Even in the palace gardens, among shimmering flowers and glowing fountains, the citizens could sense the change. People were inspired not by displays of force or authority, but by the quiet intelligence, patience, and creativity of the princess and her human partner. Queen Thalira could no longer ignore the truth. She had tried to control the future by arranging this marriage, believing she could guide her daughter, but the outcome had surpassed her expectations. Lyra's confidence, combined with Ethan's ingenuity, had created a partnership that was greater than any single ruler or advisor could achieve alone. One evening, as the palace lights shimmered beneath the stars, the queen approached Lyra quietly. "You have exceeded every expectation I had," she admitted softly. "I underestimated both you and him." Lyra took her mother's hands. "It was not just Ethan or me. It is about working together, seeing the value in different perspectives. That is where true strength lies." The queen smiled, though a hint of melancholy lingered. "I see that now. Perhaps I was too focused on appearances and tradition. I understand the power of collaboration, and I feel both pride and regret. Regret not for the marriage itself, but for underestimating humans, for failing to see their potential sooner." Lyra and Ethan had become more than a princess and her human companion. They were a symbol of possibility. Across the empire, people began to recognize that strength came in many forms. It was not just power, authority, or tradition. It was creativity, empathy, patience, and the courage to embrace what others overlooked. And so, as the twin moons rose high over the Arthurian capital, the empire celebrated an era of recognition and respect, not only for Lyra and Ethan, but for the potential hidden in every underestimated being. The foundation had been laid for a future that was brighter, wiser, and more united than anyone had imagined. The queen, observing from her chambers, knew one thing with certainty. She had arranged a marriage to strengthen the empire, but she could never have predicted the greatness that would emerge from a human's ingenuity and a princess's heart. And she could no longer doubt that history itself was being quietly rewritten by this extraordinary partnership. Years had passed since Princess Lyra first met Ethan, the human who had quietly transformed her world. The Arthurian Empire, once cautious and traditional, now hummed with a new kind of energy. Citizens spoke of innovation, collaboration, and hope. Scholars studied human techniques alongside Arthurian tradition. Villages thrived with improved infrastructure. And all the while, Lyra and Ethan worked together, guiding their people with wisdom, creativity, and care. Queen Thalira observed these changes with mixed feelings. Pride for her daughter's growth and for the thriving empire was tempered by a quiet, personal regret. She remembered the day she had arranged the marriage, seeing Ethan as a curious experiment, an outsider whose presence might strengthen Lyra. She had never imagined that humans could prove themselves in such profound ways. and she had underestimated her daughter's capacity to learn, lead, and inspire. The queen often walked alone through the palace gardens, reflecting on the years. She saw families enjoying clean water and thriving crops. She saw young Arthurians learning new crafts from humans, inspired to combine creativity with tradition. Everywhere she looked, she saw proof that her judgments had been incomplete, that her assumptions about weakness were flawed. Lyra and Ethan, meanwhile, had become inseparable partners, not just in life but in leadership. They visited distant provinces, listened to villagers' concerns, and guided engineers, teachers, and diplomats. Ethan's human perspective allowed him to see challenges that others overlooked, while Lyra's Arthurian wisdom helped implement solutions thoughtfully and respectfully. Together, they had achieved a balance that no single ruler could accomplish alone. One morning, a delegation from a distant galaxy arrived at the palace. They had heard of the Arthurian Empire's remarkable progress and wished to observe the methods behind it. Lyra and Ethan welcomed them personally, walking them through the palace workshops, gardens, and archives. "This is incredible," one diplomat said, examining a device that improved water flow in the farmlands. "The combination of human innovation and Arthurian wisdom, it is unlike anything we have seen before." Ethan smiled modestly. "We simply observe the problems, listen to the people, and try to create solutions that help everyone. That is all." Lyra added, "And we learn from each other along the way. Strength comes in many forms, and sometimes it comes from working together." The diplomats exchanged impressed glances. They had expected to see rigid tradition and authority. Instead, they saw adaptability, collaboration, and respect for every individual's contribution. This approach inspired them to consider new ways to lead their own civilizations. Back in the palace, Queen Thalira watched from her balcony. She felt a deep sense of humility. She had arranged this marriage thinking she could control the outcome, believing she was shaping her daughter's destiny. Instead, she had witnessed something far greater, a partnership that had transformed the empire, strengthened her daughter, and elevated a human to a position of honor and respect. One evening, as the twin moons rose over the capital, Queen Thalira summoned Lyra to her chambers. The room shimmered with crystal light, reflecting the beauty of Arthuria's growth. Lyra entered, bowing respectfully. "Mother," she said softly, "you wish to see me." The queen studied her daughter for a long moment. "Lyra, you have surpassed every expectation I had. I thought I was guiding you, shaping your strength, but I see now that you and Ethan have created a strength far beyond what I imagined." Lyra's eyes softened. "We have learned together, Mother." Ethan's perspective showed me that strength is not only about tradition or appearances. It is about understanding, cooperation, and courage to embrace new ideas. Queen Thalira nodded, her voice tinged with both pride and regret. "I underestimated humans. I underestimated you. And I regret the years I spent doubting what you could achieve. But now I see the truth, and it is beautiful." Lyra took her mother's hand gently. "There is nothing to regret. The past led us here, and now the empire thrives because we work together." Ethan, standing quietly nearby, added, "It is never too late to recognize the potential in others, Mother. Strength can appear in unexpected forms, and together we can achieve far more than any of us alone." The queen smiled, a mixture of humility and pride. She realized that true leadership was not about control, but about fostering potential, listening to others, and embracing collaboration, even with those from a completely different world. In the years that followed, the Arthurian Empire became a shining example across the galaxy. Humans and Arthurians worked together, sharing knowledge, solving problems, and celebrating their diverse talents. Villages flourished, cities thrived, and young leaders grew up inspired by the partnership of a princess and a human who had proved that collaboration and creativity were just as powerful as tradition and authority. Lyra and Ethan remained inseparable, their love and partnership inspiring not only the Empire but also neighboring systems. Citizens admired their ability to balance strength with kindness, wisdom with curiosity, and tradition with innovation. Queen Thalira, though often reflective, found peace in knowing that her daughter and Ethan had created a legacy far greater than she had ever envisioned. She walked the palace gardens one evening, watching children play among the glowing plants, elders teaching lessons of history and technology, and humans and Arthurians working side by side. A smile crossed her face. "I see it now," she whispered. "True strength comes from the courage to learn, to adapt, and to work together." Lyra, watching from nearby, caught her mother's gaze and smiled. "You were right in one way, Mother. I am stronger because of the choices we made. And together we can help others find their strength too." Ethan joined them, placing a gentle hand on Lyra's shoulder. "It is only the beginning. The universe is full of possibilities, and together we will continue to explore, learn, and grow." The twin moons reflected on the crystal towers of Arthuria, casting a serene light over the thriving empire. For the first time in centuries, the queen felt the weight of her own expectations lifted. She had attempted to shape destiny with rigid plans, but she realized that sometimes destiny unfolds in ways far more remarkable than anyone could predict. Lyra and Ethan had become more than rulers. They were symbols of hope, ingenuity, and collaboration, a reminder that underestimated beings could achieve greatness, and that strength was not always what it seemed. It was quiet, patient, and often surprising. As the stars sparkled above the Arthurian capital, the queen reflected on her journey of understanding. She had doubted humans, she had doubted her daughter, and she had doubted the future. Yet here it was, brighter and stronger than ever before. She had learned the greatest lesson of all: never underestimate potential, and never assume that weakness defines capability. The empire had entered a golden era, one defined not by fear or rigidity but by wisdom, innovation, and unity. Lyra and Ethan's partnership had shown that even those who were underestimated could inspire greatness, and that collaboration could create a legacy that would endure for generations. The queen's regret was not a bitter one. It was a recognition of the truth she had once failed to see. And in that recognition, she found hope, pride, and a renewed belief in the limitless potential of life across every world and every species. Years later, when future generations looked back at this period, they would speak of the princess and the human who changed the empire. They would tell stories of courage without violence, of ingenuity without arrogance, and of partnership that bridged worlds. And Queen Thalira would remember the moment she understood the power of underestimated beings, the humans, and the strength that comes when hearts and minds work together toward a common goal. Lyra and Ethan stood hand in hand on the palace terraces, looking over a kingdom transformed. The empire was alive with possibility, glowing with the light of knowledge, innovation, and collaboration. And somewhere, quietly, the queen acknowledged that she had been part of something far greater than she had ever imagined. The Arthurian Empire had been shaped not just by rulers, but by courage, understanding, and the remarkable power of human ingenuity. And in that realization, a once doubtful queen found peace, pride, and a lasting legacy that would inspire generations to come.